The stage let her off at the edge of Tamarak, with the light already gone long and yellow across the wagon road. And she stood for a while beside her trunk where the driver had set it down, letting the dust settle around her boots before she chose a direction. The driver did not wait. He clucked at the team, and the coach pulled away east toward the next town, and the rattle of it thinned and was gone. And then there was only the wind moving through the pines on the slope above the buildings, and the far-off sound of an axe somewhere, slow and patient. A man splitting wood for the evening. She had a paper in the pocket of her coat. She did not take it out. She had read it so many times on the long ride up from the rail terminus that the creases had begun to whiten, and the ink at the folds had worn to a ghost. She knew what it said. A man in Tamarak wanted a woman to keep his house and mind a child. He could pay a fair wage. A room came with the work. He had written nothing about himself except that his wife had passed in the spring and the girl was 7, and the house had gone to ruin in a way he did not have the hours to mend. He had not promised anything. He had not asked for anything but the labor. That was why she had answered it. A man who promised nothing was a man who could not later be caught in a lie, and she had grown tired, in the years since her own losses, of catching people in lies. The town was small the way these high places were always small. One street that gave up its plank walks past the feed store and turned to rutted dirt. A church with a bell she could see but not hear. A store with a porch, 2 men sitting on it who stopped their talk when she came into view and did not start again until she had passed. A woman in a doorway watched her go by with the flat, unhurried interest of someone who would have the whole of it told over a supper table within the hour. She was used to that. She lifted her chin a degree and went on toward the store, because the storekeeper would know everyone, and she needed to know where the Wheelwright kept his shop. The bell over the door clanged when she pushed it. A heavy-set man behind the counter looked up from a crate he was prying open. "Help you, ma'am." "I'm looking for the Wheelwright," she said. "A man who works wagons. He'd have a child with him." "A girl." The storekeeper set down his pry bar. Something moved behind his eyes, a small recalculation, the slotting of her into a place he had already heard about. "You'd be the one he sent for," he said. It was not quite a question. "I would, Hollis," he said, and put out a hand across the counter, and she took it because there was no reason not to. "You'll want the last building before the road bends, past the smithy, on the creek side. He's got the shop and the house both back there. You can't miss the noise." He paused, and she could see him deciding whether to say more, and then he said it anyway, and gentle the way men were gentle when they thought a woman was walking into something she didn't understand. "He's a quiet man. Wasn't always. Don't take it personal." "I won't," she said, and picked up nothing, because her trunk was still at the edge of town, and she would deal with it after. She thanked him and went out. The Wheelwright's place sat exactly where Hollis had said, the last lot before the road swung north to follow the creek out of town. The shop faced the street, a long, low building with its wide doors thrown open, and from inside came the steady work of a man bending a felloe over a wheel jig, the creak of green wood pressed into a curve, the tap of a mallet seating a spoke. The house stood behind and to the left, joined to the shop by a short covered way so a man could pass between in foul weather without going out into it. A kitchen garden lay beside the house, gone mostly to weed, a clothesline with nothing on it. She took all of this in the way she took in any new place, mapping it, learning the distances, where the well was and where the woodpile was, and which window looked out on what. There was a child sitting on the step of the house. A girl of about 7, fair-haired, barefoot despite the cool of the day, with her arms wrapped around her knees. She was not playing. She was watching the road, and she watched the woman come up it with a stillness that was not shyness. It was the stillness of a child who had learned to wait for things that did not come. The woman stopped at the gate. "Hello," she said. The girl said nothing. She looked at the woman's face and then at her bag and then at her face again. "I've come about the work," the woman said, because it seemed honest to say it to the child as well, and because she did not believe in talking over children's heads as if they were furniture. "Is your father in the shop?" The girl nodded once. She did not get up to fetch him. She turned her head toward the open shop doors, and the woman understood that the child had said all she meant to say, which was nothing. And she went past her and crossed the yard to the shop and stood at the edge of the wide doorway. The man was bent over the wheel. He had not heard her, or had heard her, and chosen the moment he would acknowledge it. He worked a spoke into the fellow with two short, sure taps and ran his thumb along the joint to feel it true, and only then did he straighten and look at her. He was younger than she had pictured, and older than the work suggested, somewhere in his middle 30s, with sawdust gone pale, in the dark of his hair and forearms scarred the way a man's were when he had spent his life close to wood and iron. He looked at her the way he had looked at the wheel, measuring, checking it for true. "You came up on today's stage," he said. "I did." He nodded slowly. He set the mallet down on the bench, handle toward him, the way a careful man sets a tool down even when he means to pick it up again. "You read the notice plain." "I read it plain." "Then you know what it is. House. The girl. There's no more to it than what I wrote." "I didn't come for more than what you wrote," she said. Something in his face eased, just barely, the way the surface of water eases when the wind drops. "Wage is 12 a month," he said. "Rooms the loft, has its own stair, you needn't pass through anywhere of mine to reach it. You eat at the table. The girl's name is Etta. She doesn't talk. She did before." He stopped. He did not finish the sentence, and she did not ask him to. "If that's a thing you can't manage, say so now, and I'll square you for the trouble of the trip, and you can take tomorrow's stage back." "I can manage a child who doesn't talk," she said. "I've managed worse." He looked at her a moment longer, and she let him, because she had nothing to hide, and that was its own kind of armor. Then he wiped his hands on the leather of his apron and said, "Your trunk, at the east end of town, by the road. I'll fetch it after I bank the fire," he said, meaning the shop fire, the small forge he kept for the iron tires and the hardware. "You'll want to see the kitchen before dark. It's not in a state." It was not. She found that out when she went in. The house was sound enough, 2 rooms below and the loft above, plank floors and a good stove. But it had the particular desolation of a place where a woman had died, and the work she did had simply stopped, mid-motion, and never been taken up again. A bolt of cloth half cut on the table, the scissors still lying where they'd been set down. A row of jars on a shelf gone cloudy. A child's dress, too small now, folded on a chair as if waiting for someone to decide what to do with it. She did not touch the dress. She built up the stove and found what stores there were. Cornmeal, a side of bacon hung in the cold room, beans, a little coffee, and she made what could be made of it, because the light was going and a child had to eat whether or not the woman who fed her was a stranger. The girl came in when the smell of the bacon reached her. She sat at the table without being asked and watched the woman work the spider over the heat. The man came in later, with the trunk on his shoulder, and set it at the foot of the loft stair without a word, and washed at the basin, and sat. The woman put a plate in front of the child, and a plate in front of the man, and took the third for herself at the far side of the table. And they ate in a silence that was not unkind. It was only a silence. The child ate everything on her plate. So did the man. The woman noticed this, and filed it away with the other things she was learning. That they were hungry. That they had been hungry for some time, in the way a house goes hungry when no one is left who knows how to keep it fed. When the meal was done, the man pushed his plate back a careful inch and turned his cup in his hands and looked at the table, not at her. "There's wood split for 3 days," he said. "After that you'll have to tell me and I'll split more, or show you where the mall is and you can do it yourself if you'd rather." Some women would rather. "I'd rather know where the mall is," she said. He almost smiled. She saw it go across his face and away. "By the chopping block," he said. "Good night then." That was the first day. In the days that followed, she learned the shape of the place the way you learn the shape of a body in the dark, by touch and repetition until the distances lived in her hands. She learned that the well was 40 steps from the kitchen door and the woodpile 20 and the privy further, down a path worn into the grass. She learned which floorboard in the loft groaned and how to step over it so as not to wake the child below. She learned that the man rose before light and lit the stove himself every morning and had the coffee made by the time she came down, and that he did this not as a courtesy to her but because he had always done it before and had gone on doing it through the spring and the summer when there had been no one to make it for. And she understood that there were things a grieving man did to keep the floor of the world from dropping out from under him, and that the morning fire was one of them. The girl was the harder country. She did not speak, and the woman did not press her to. She had known children who needed silence the way other children needed noise, and she gave it. She did not fill the air with the bright, relentless chatter that some women used on quiet children, as if a child's silence were a hole to be packed. She let the girl be silent beside her, and she found small, wordless work for the two of them to do together, shelling beans, turning the garden bed, carding wool. And she would set the girl's hands to a task and then leave a space, an unhurried, undemanding space, and she watched the child fill it, sometimes with the smallest things. A finger pointed at a beetle. A handful of the first late asters held up for the woman to see, and then dropped, embarrassed, when the woman only nodded as if it were the most natural thing in the world to be shown a flower. It was in the second week that she first noticed the birds. She had gone up to the loft to fetch her shawl, and on the sill of the small window there sat a bird carved from a piece of pale pine. A wren, she thought, or something like it, small and round-bodied with its tail cocked up, the whole of it no bigger than her thumb, the wood smoothed by a knife and then smoothed again by something finer, a careful hand. She picked it up. It had weight to it out of all proportion to its size, the way a small good thing has weight. She did not know how it had come to be on her sill. She had not put it there. She set it back exactly where she had found it and went down with her shawl and said nothing. 3 days later there was a second one, a different bird, a longer one, with a knife-cut suggestion of a sharp beak. She knew then that he was making them, that he carved them in the shop in the gaps between the wagon work, and that he was leaving them where she would find them. She did not understand it. She turned it over in her mind the way she turned the bird over in her hand. He had not said a word about them. He did not look at her any differently at the table. He left them and said nothing, and she kept them and said nothing, and the row on the sill grew, one bird and then another, through the cooling weeks of September, until there were 5 of them lined up looking out the small window at the creek. She thought once that they might be for the child, that he meant her to give them to Etta. But the loft was hers alone. The girl never climbed the stair. The man had said so the first night, that she needn't pass through anywhere of his to reach her room, and that no one would pass through hers. The birds were on her sill, in her room, and they were not for the child. She did not let herself follow the thought further than that. She had learned, in the years since her own house had emptied, not to follow certain thoughts to their ends, because the ends were rarely kind, and a woman alone could not afford to feed a hope and then bury it. October came on cold. There had been a hard frost that silvered the garden and laid the last of the asters flat, and the man had begun bringing the wagon work inside the shop to keep his hands from stiffening. And one afternoon, when the sky had gone the color of a wet stone, the woman looked up from the bread she was setting to rise, and the girl was not at the table. She had been there a moment before. The woman was certain of it, the way you are certain of a thing your eye has held without your mind attending to it. The girl had been at the table with the carding combs, and then the woman had turned to the dough, and when she turned back the chair was empty, and the door was open 2 inches on its leather hinge, and the cold was coming through it. The woman did not panic. Panic was a thing she had taught herself out of, long ago, in a different kitchen, on a worse day. She wiped her hands and went to the door and looked out, and the yard was empty and the gate stood open. She went to the shop. The man looked up from the jig. "The girl," she said, "she's gone out the gate." He was across the shop and out the doors before she had finished saying it. They stood together in the yard, both of them turning, reading the ground, and she saw the small bare footprints in the frost-stiffened mud of the path, going not toward the town but the other way, north, toward the creek and the timber. And a cold went through her that had nothing to do with the weather. "The creek," she said. "She knows not to," he said, but he was already moving, and she was moving with him, and the sky was lowering, and a few hard flakes had begun to come down, the first of them slanting and small, the kind that meant more behind it. They found her tracks along the bank. The creek ran high and quick this time of year, snowmelt from the peaks still feeding it. The water the gray-green of glacier melt and cold enough to stop a heart. The footprints went along the top of the bank and then down toward a place where a fallen cottonwood made a kind of bridge, a thing a 7-year-old might think she could cross, and the woman's whole chest seized at the sight of it. And the man called the girl's name once. sharp, into the wind, and got nothing back but the wind. It was the woman who saw her. Below the fallen tree, on a gravel bar midstream, the girl crouched, soaked to the waist where she had gone in, and somehow dragged herself out, white-faced, shaking, her arms locked around a sodden gray shape that the woman could not make sense of for a moment, and then could. A barn cat, the half-wild gray cat that lived in the shop, and had kittens in the loft of the wagon shed. And one of the kittens, the woman understood all at once, must have gone into the water, and the girl had gone in after it. And now she crouched on the gravel with the drowned thing in her arms and could not get back across, and the water on either side of the bar ran fast and deep and rising. The man went in without taking off his coat. The woman would remember that he did not stop to think of himself, that he went into that killing water in his boots and his coat, and waded out with the current shoving at his thighs and reached the bar, and gathered the child up, cat and all, and turned and fought his way back, with the girl clamped against his chest and her face buried in his neck. He came up the bank gray and gasping, and the woman took the child from him, and the child was so cold she did not feel like a living thing. And the woman stripped her own coat off and wrapped the girl in it, and they went back to the house at a run, all three of them. The snow coming harder now, fat and fast and silent. The hours after that were the hardest work she had done in years. She got the child out of the wet clothes and into a hot bath drawn off the stove reservoir and into dry wool and under every blanket in the house, and she set bricks in the oven to warm and wrapped them in cloth and packed them around the small body. And she got broth into the girl spoonful by spoonful, and the man, stripped to dry clothes himself, his lips gone pale, knelt by the bed and held the child's cold hands between his two big warm ones and rubbed them and did not stop. And the woman watched him do it. The wheelwright who had not been able to bring himself to put away his dead wife's scissors, kneeling in the lamplight chafing his daughter's hands, and something in her that had been held very carefully shut for a long time moved against the door of itself. The girl came warm slowly. By full dark, she had stopped shaking. By the time the lamp wanted trimming, her color had come back, and she had fallen into a real sleep, deep and even, her hand fisted in the wool of the blanket. The man sat back on his heels. He looked at the woman across the bed. "I didn't put the kitten in the water," he said, low, and she understood that he was not making sense yet, that the cold and the fear had knocked something loose in him, and that he was confessing to a thing that was not his fault because his mind had reached for the nearest guilt. "She loved that cat's litter. I should have." "You should have nothing," the woman said. "You went into that creek, you got her out. There's no more to be asked of a man than that." He looked at her. The lamp guttered and steadied. Outside, the snow was coming down past the window in the dark, thick now, a real fall, the first real fall of the year, and the room was warm and close and smelled of broth and wood smoke and wet wool drying. "She talked," he said. The woman went still. "In the water," he said. "When I reached her, she said my name. First word she said since." He stopped. His jaw worked. "Since the spring. She said it in the water, and she's not said another since, but she said it." The woman looked down at the sleeping child, at the small fist in the blanket, and she did not say any of the things a lesser comfort would have said. She did not say it would all be well now, because she did not know that it would. She said, "Then it's still in there, the talking. It's only gone quiet, the way a creek goes quiet under ice. It's running underneath." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded and stood, his knees cracking, and went to bank the stove for the night. And the ordinary work of the house closed over the day like water over a stone. The cold held after that. The snow that fell that night did not melt off. It lay, and more came, and the high country settled into its long white silence, 3 weeks earlier than the men in town said it had any right to. The creek skinned over with ice along its edges. The wagon work slowed, the way it did in winter, and the man spent more of his hours in the house. And the three of them learned the close indoor arithmetic of a small place in a long winter, how to be near one another without crowding, how to share the warmth of one stove and the light of one lamp without wearing on each other. The girl began, very slowly, to speak, not in sentences. A word at first dropped into the quiet like a stone into a pond, and then gone again for a day, and then another. The woman never made anything of it when it happened. She answered the word as if words from the child were the most ordinary thing in the world, and went on with what she was doing. And she saw that this was the right way, because the ease of it let the next word come easier. By the deep of December, the girl would say a thing or two at supper, small things, and the man would answer her in his low, even voice, as if his heart were not going sideways in his chest. And the woman, watching, kept her own face calm and let them have it. There were more birds on her sill by then, 9 of them. 10. She had stopped pretending to herself that she did not know what they were. A man who could not say a thing aloud could say it in pine. She had understood that much. What she had not let herself understand, or had not let herself believe, was what the saying meant. And one evening late in December, when the girl had gone to bed, and the man sat at the table, mending a harness strap by lamplight, and the woman sat across from him with her own work, she set her needle down and said into the quiet, "The birds." His hands went still on the leather. He did not look up. "You've been leaving them," she said. "On my sill, since September. I've counted them," he said. "There's one I made today. I'll bring it up." And then, because she had opened the door and she was learning, a man who would walk through a door once it was opened, but never force one himself, he said, still looking at the harness. "My wife. She kept a row of them on the kitchen sill. Birds I'd made her. First winter we were married, I made her one because there was nothing else to give, and we had no money for anything bought. And then it got to be a thing. One a winter, after she passed, he stopped. He turned the strap over in his hands. I burned them, all of them. One night in the spring, I couldn't stand to look at them, and I put them in the stove. I've regretted it every day since. A man does a thing like that in grief and then has to live in the after of it." The woman waited. She had learned that he needed the waiting. "I started making them again in September," he said. "I told myself it was just the hands needing something. A man's hands need a small thing to do in the gaps. But I didn't put them on the kitchen sill." He looked up then, finally, and met her eyes across the lamp. "I put them on yours." The fire ticked in the stove. Outside, the snow came down past the dark window in the way it would come for months, steady, unhurried, indifferent. "I'm not asking you for anything you didn't come for," he said. "You came for the work and the wage, and I'll honor that, whether you say another word to me about birds or not. The loft is yours and the wage is yours, and you've a place here as long as you want it, and that's true no matter what. I want you to know that's true first before I say the rest, so you don't think the one hangs on the other. It doesn't." He drew a breath. "But the rest is I'd have you stay. Not for the house I could hire kept. I'd have you stay because the girl said your name to the cat last week when she thought no one heard, and because I find I make the coffee in the morning thinking of you coming down to it now, and not the way I used to make it, which was so the floor wouldn't fall out from under me. I make it now because I'd like to hand you a cup." That's the rest of it. The woman sat very still. There was a thing in her chest that had been closed for years, since a fever had taken the two people who had made her a wife and a mother in the space of a single terrible week. And she had carried the closed thing across half a continent and into this kitchen and up the loft stair every night. And she felt it now, not breaking open, nothing so violent as that, but easing, the way a fist eases when the danger it was clenched against has finally slowly passed. "I lost a husband," she said, "and a girl of my own. Younger than Etta, both in 1 week, the same fever. 4 years gone." She had not said it aloud to anyone in those 4 years. It cost her something to say it, and it cost her less than she had feared. "I didn't come up here looking to be made a wife again. I came up here because I knew how to keep a house, and I needed a house to keep, and I thought, if I kept a stranger's house, I'd not have to feel anything about it." She looked at the row of his hands on the worn table, the scarred, careful hands. "I didn't plan on the girl. I didn't plan on the birds." "No," he said. "I don't expect either of us planned on much. October's well behind us now," she said. He did not understand the reference, because it was hers, a thing from her own first days here that she had never told him, the way she had thought, watching him those first weeks, that October was a long way off, and she need not decide anything yet. But he heard the turn in her voice, if not the meaning, and he waited. "I'm not waiting on the next stage anymore," she said. "I stopped some weeks back. I only just now noticed I'd stopped." He let out a breath she had not known he was holding. He did not reach across the table for her hand. He did not get up. He was not a man who would grab at a thing for fear it might be taken back. He only nodded, once, slow, the way he nodded at a wheel that had come true, and he said, "I'll bring the 11th up tomorrow then." To the sill. "With the others," she agreed. She woke before light. The window of the loft had gone the particular flat white that had no hour in it, and she knew without rising what it meant, that more snow had come in the night and laid itself over everything and smoothed the world clean. She dressed in the cold and went down. The stove was lit. The coffee was made. He was not in the kitchen. Through the window she could see him crossing the yard toward the shop with his collar up and his head down, unhurried, his tracks already half filled behind him, going and coming and going again. A man who had been up working in the dark for some while. She poured herself a cup from the pot he had made. On the kitchen sill, where she had not put it, where she had never once put anything, stood the 11th bird, brought down in the night, and set there among nothing, the first thing to stand on that sill since the spring. She looked at it a long time. Then she picked up her coffee and stood at the window and watched the snow come down over the yard, steady and slow, filling the man's tracks, making the whole of it even and new. And she heard the girl stir in the room behind her and say, "Sleep Rue and clear. Is it snowing?" 2 words, 3 more than she had strung together in all the months, and the woman said without turning, so the child would not see how it had landed in her, "It is. Come and see." And the small bare feet came across the floor, and the 3 of them, in their separate corners of the cold, bright morning, were each of them exactly where they had meant, at last, without quite admitting it, to be.